Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 23rd episode of the TechForge podcast here on the CrossForge Gaming channel. I am your host once again, aka Ned. And I am joined this evening by my other faithful co-host, Jason.
Hello.
Unfortunately, Hunter had a previous engagement and could not be with us as we record this evening. So he will be joining us next week for that.
Yeah, he's all spiritualizing and stuff, like making his soul better.
Yes.
Silly Protoss person. Templar Protoss.
Well, I cannot fault him for taking time to go to church.
Yes.
But unfortunately, we had to make some unusual arrangements this week, and so we're recording a day early, and that's why we can't all be here for this one.
Well, it's the holidays.
Yeah, it happens. So, but all that aside, we do have some excellent topics for this week. Mostly because last week we focused on an all hardware deals edition for Black Friday.
Yep.
This week we have a collection of news from the past couple of weeks that is all very interesting. Not all of them are as big stories as you typically see in the tech news. Largely because there's not a whole lot of new releases this time of year. But there is some interesting rumors about Intel and potential 10-core CPUs in the mainstream. There's some additional information we've learned about AMD's 7nm. And Samsung has released a new product, that brings QLC flash to the mainstream. They're not the first to produce a QLC NAND flash SSD, but they're the first to bring it to a mainstream product in their 860 QVO. So we'll be talking about that as well.
That's fun to say. QVO. QVO.
Yes, it's odd branding in my opinion, but
yeah,
it does have its own distinctive.
Yeah, it's just fun to say. QVO.
So let's get started and let's take a look at first this rumor that's going around about Intel's Comet Lake S CPUs and the fact that they could sport up to 10 cores in a mainstream desktop CPU from Intel. This is coming from Hexus.net. This particular leak/rumor originally came from a Taiwanese tech forum. There's a link in the Hexus.net article that we have linked to below. But it is all in Chinese, so you're going to want to run some Google Translate on that at the very least. Unless you read Chinese. So, Jimmy, you'll be right at home.
Mm-hmm. I'm a little jealous of that guy sometimes when he's reading the stuff.
Anyway, Comet Lake S is supposed to be the successor to Coffee Lake and the Coffee Lake Refresh. And it is supposed to be manufactured on Intel's 14nm++ process, with the top-end model featuring a 10-core, 20-thread CPU, if this particular rumor is to be believed. Now, given that the Core i9-9900K is an 8-core, 16-thread part on the 14nm++ process, and there have been some concerns about keeping that processor cool. Obviously, there is some concern that if this is in fact the case, that Intel has decided to make a 10-core, 20-thread processor on their mainstream socket, that we could run into some serious cooling issues with such a chip.
Yeah, I'd have to agree to that because for the longest time, at least since Haswell came out, Intel's process has been extremely efficient, and it is efficient. Motherboard manufacturers have been able to get away with tricks and schemes in their BIOSes to allow the processor just to boost almost to infinity. And it's gotten really bad with the most recent, generation of parts. I think mainly because 14 nanometer, 8 cores, 16 threads, hyper-threading runs the cores hotter anyway. Um, and with a lot of these really aggressive auto boosting algorithms that are built into pretty much all of the major manufacturers' BIOSes, unless you've got a probably a $250 board or better, where the VRM is extremely solid, it's allowing some crazy high auto overclocks on the processor, and multi-threaded workloads are going up 200 watts of power and consumption. And when you're trying to cool that, there's only a handful of heat sinks that can do that reliably. You're looking at a $90 cooler, you know? Um,
Right, for
and
your
from
$600 CPU
yeah,
that you're already putting on at least a $200 motherboard.
right. And unless you've got, so from an AIO perspective, that's a 240 millimeter AIO or better. 240 mil AIO, unless you've got aggressive fan curves, will struggle with keeping a 200-watt TDP in check. You can do it with with an open loop 120 mil radiator, but you're looking at a radiator that's very thick with a push-pull fan config. Um, I guess what I'm trying to get to is you will need to invest pretty heavily in cooling. And if they're talking about a 10 core parts, I don't know. I mean, my hat's off to them. They've got extremely good processors, but I just don't know. You would have to probably disable a lot of that auto boosting stuff in the BIOS or run it off of Intel's actual, boost spec, which is don't allow it to run beyond the TDP. Unfortunately, when you do that, and there's been a lot of testing come out recently where they have done that with the 9900K, and it very much limits that processor.
Yes, I saw some of the testing from some of the tech outlets. I think Gamers Nexus and Hardware Unboxed in particular
Mm-hmm.
did some limiting testing where they forced the CPU to run at the Intel specified 95-watt limits, and you were looking at anywhere from a 5 to a 15% drop in performance.
Mm-hmm. Yep, because you're keeping it in check. And there's some very valid use cases for that, i.e. cooling.
Mm-hmm.
Or VRM, power delivery. Like, you say you're one of the unfortunate people that spent less than $250 on a motherboard, or you bought one of the few $250 motherboards that have weak VRM, and you just let it run off the stock BIOS, and it clocks to infinity and beyond, and you're shutting down because of VRM issues, or you spend $110 on a 390 board that should not exist because of super weak VRM. And if you're not limiting it to that 95 or 100 watt TDP, you're gonna have problems. This is an interesting move. I just I don't know, man. It's going to be interesting to see what happens.
There is one other little bit of technical detail that was dropped in this particular leak, And that is that if they do move to this 10-core, 20-thread CPU, instead of the traditional single ring bus interconnect that's used in the current mainstream desktop market, they're considering the use of a dual ring bus interconnect.
Interesting. Would they still stick with dual channel RAM?
That's a good question, and unfortunately, that's not information that's provided in the leak.
Have to be probably closer to release or more previews. I wonder when this is set to come out.
Like I said, it's mostly rumor at this point. The one thing that is solid is that apparently a few of the 9000 series mobile parts also spilled out with this leak. This coming from Lenovo. 3 of the 9th gen CPUs, the i7-9550U, the i5-9250U, and the i3-9130U, are apparently going to be options in Lenovo's new IdeaPad S530, where they will be paired with NVIDIA's GeForce MX 150 discrete GPUs.
Those mobile processor SKUs are getting really confusing now.
Yeah, it's interesting that they're calling this 9000 series still 8th gen Intel Core processors, even though they're numbering them 9000 series.
Well, it's the same architecture. I mean, I wonder if they're going to be putting solder on to any of their mobile parts for better heat transfer. I doubt it, but I don't know much about their mobile processor stack.
Well, these are most likely going to be successors to the 8550U, the 8250U, and the 8130U, which they're also called 8th gen, but technically they are Kaby Lake R.
Ah, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, the mobile naming scheme does not sync up exactly with the desktop scheme, unfortunately. It's not clear at this point whether these are going to be 14 nanometer double plus Comet Lake parts, or if these are going to be some of the new 10 nanometer Ice Lake parts.
I don't know. I could see some of the lower end SKUs being 10 nanometer, but to get up into the i5, i7, probably even i3, 10 nanometer, I don't know. They'd have to be pretty quality parts or mostly defect free on their fab. Intel's pretty anal about quality when it comes to that stuff. I don't know. That's a very good question.
My money would be on 14 nanometer plus plus.
Mine too.
Simply because the only 10 nanometer part that they produced up to this point was a Core i3 8123U, or like 8121U.
Mm-hmm.
And it had actually inferior clock speeds to the same CPU done on the 14 nanometer process. So who knows?
Well, it speaks to quality challenges for sure.
All right.
I mean, that begs the question: is that part bend, or how well bend is the part?
Right.
So
let's see. Next here on the list, we have MSI. We talked a few weeks ago about NVIDIA was going to release or allow their add-in board partners to release a version of the GTX 1060 with GDDR5X memory. Well, MSI appears to be the first one to do so with their GeForce GTX 1060 Armor 6G D5X OC model. Try saying that 10 times fast. So this is apparently going to be a variant on their GTX 1060 Armor model. Obviously, it's going to be the 6 gigabyte variant, but the only real difference is that this is the memory modules are going to be swapped out with GDDR5X.
So I'm looking through the article. So there's a couple of interesting things here. The DDR5X, of course, from some of the other stuff I've read, is that the 5X is actually not as fast, or is as fast as the 9 gigabit per second DDR5 variant that they had. But the interesting thing here is the GP104, which is found in the 1070 Ti, and the 1080. So I've got to wonder if these are just stripped down versions, or maybe they're 104s that had some kind of quality control issues.
Well, yeah, my guess would be these were GTX 1070s that failed the quality control checks to become full-fledged GTX 1070s, and so they had some of their execution units disabled to bring them on par with the GTX 1060 in CUDA cores and whatnot.
Yeah.
And then we're just built with 6 gigabytes of GDDR5X.
And also, why the 8 and the 6-pin connector? Because an 8-pin will do you just fine on a 1070 or a 1070 Ti, lower end 1070 Ti. A single 8-pin plus the PCI Express bus will easily get you a 200 watt TDP. I don't know why they're including the 6-pin. That's just overkill, I think. Because most of the 1066 gigabyte cards come with a 6-pin.
Right. Well, they mention in the article that since it's based on a GP104 die, they may decide to build the card around a GP104 PCB that they already have.
Just reusing parts.
And so they said it would not surprise them to see it resembling the GTX 1080 Armor Edition, which does have an 8-pin and a 6-pin and uses the exact same cooler.
So I'm looking at this picture, right? And I see the SLI bridges, or the SLI connectors, are kind of capped.
Right.
You know,
because the 1060 this generation does not support SLI.
Yeah. But if a lot of these are using GP104 PCBs, or reusing them with the additional power delivery, it's going to be interesting to see what modders can do, if anything, with these cards. You know, if they can try, I don't know if they can find BIOSes or not. I don't know.
To see if perhaps they can unlock some of the CUDA cores in there and turn it back into a GTX 1070 or GTX 1070 Ti.
Maybe. Or if they can, even if they can't do that, maybe the 1070 and higher cards have the ability to unlock higher voltages, so you can, you know, in theory, get higher overclocks. Because I hate to use AMD as an example, but if you look at Vega, the reason Vega 56 owners flash a 64 or a 64 liquid cooled BIOS is to enable higher base and boost clocks, but also to get the higher voltages, because that's the big differences in the BIOSes, is not just the base and boost clock speed, but with each tier you go up. You know, if you go up to the 64 or the liquid cooled, they have higher base voltages for HBM and for the GPU, but also higher base and boost clock speeds. And then the 64 liquid cooled BIOS, that's like creme de la creme of black hole power consumption, because it's got crazy high base and boost clocks and crazy high HBM clocks as well. So I don't know. Be interesting to see if they are indeed moddable. I would guess not, but never know.
Well, you know, I know NVIDIA was pretty tight over the GTX 1070 Ti about overclocking and modability about those cards so that they wouldn't impact GTX 1080 sales. And so we'll see. I would not get my hopes up, though.
Yeah, that's one of the few cards where you benefit actually paying a little bit more to get better cooling and better power delivery, because you can really overclock some of those to some insane levels, but you have to have the PCB to back it up.
But if this GTX 1060 with GDDR5X isn't really getting, isn't getting your blood pumping, then maybe you might be more interested in the next story. This one's also from Tom's Hardware, but it refers to a leaked benchmark of the RTX 2060, which, if it's to be believed, is about 30% faster than GTX 1060. And so,
yeah.
Now, admittedly, the benchmark this is coming from, the benchmark database is coming from, is one that is generally considered to be pretty poor by a lot of the reviewing community, and that is the Final Fantasy 15 benchmark. Steve over at Gamers Nexus did an entire video detailing all the issues with that particular benchmark. But it also seems to be a place where a lot of unreleased graphics cards seem to be revealed. Even the RX 590 was spotted in the same database long before its official launch. So, if what we're seeing about the RTX 2060 at the moment is true, we can expect performance roughly 30% faster than the current GTX 1060, which would put it right around the current 1070.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's all well and good, but what's it going to be priced at? Right?
Right.
Our RTX 2070 is $500 for super basement level, and then $600 for something pretty decent. What's the pricing going to be? I mean, are they going to be charging $400 for a 2060?
And if they are, I can almost guarantee they won't sell at that price.
They shouldn't. That's ridiculous.
Well, no, let me rephrase that. I can almost guarantee they will sell at that price, but they shouldn't.
I agree. It's not a $400 part. $300 is pushing it.
Yeah, the price for the GTX 1060 was already pushing it at anywhere from $250 to $300.
Mm-hmm.
According to this, apparently the RTX 2060 falls roughly 4.4% behind the RX Vega 56. Or excuse me, the RX Vega. The benchmark chart does not indicate whether it is Vega 56 or Vega 64. Given that the RTX 2060 is only 4.44% behind, I'm guessing probably Vega 56.
Well, Vega 56 is usually at parity with 1070 or slightly faster. Ever so slightly. Like within 5%, plus or minus 5%. So
but the important bit for AMD is it does put it roughly 22% faster than the RX 590. Now, obviously, all of these had to be taken with a huge grain of salt because we have a crummy benchmark. We have a card that's not even confirmed to technically exist yet.
Right.
And we have numbers that may not be comparable from an engineering sample that may not be final.
Yeah. Just such a bummer about GPUs right now. It's just hard to get excited about the new stuff because it's so darned expensive. I don't know. I'm just kind of meh. I'm trying not to get my hopes up because I'm expecting this to be a $400 to $500 part.
Yeah, you're probably unfortunately right. But you're not the only one who is dismayed at the prices of the latest graphics cards. Now, this first report from WCCF Tech is based on information from their third quarter reports and from a report published by John Petty Research.
John Petty Research?
Yeah,
Okay.
Peddie.
I was thinking Tom Petty.
No heartbreakers here. And so, apparently, over the quarter, AMD saw GPU shipments increase by 6.5%, whereas NVIDIA only saw a 4.3% increase across Q3 2018. But it's actually Intel who saw the largest shipment increase in GPUs at 13.1%.
Now, how is that possible?
Well, I guess if you include their integrated graphics solutions that you pretty much have to get if you get their CPUs.
Okay. I would have thought the AMD value might be slightly higher, just considering pricing. I mean, Vega came down in price. Polaris really came down in price. I would have thought they would have sold a lot more because, I mean, the 580 is still an extremely good part. Those are the 570. And those are $200 right now and less. So, I don't know. NVIDIA, I can see them because all the graphics card prices came down. So, and they've been selling a lot of the older Pascal stuff still.
Yeah, the one thing that I noted that was interesting here is it seems that most of the increased sales seen by all the vendors was due to shipments in notebooks, in particular notebook GPUs.
That's interesting.
Apparently, those GPU shipments increased 7%, whereas desktop graphics cards decreased by a whopping 16%. So desktop graphics fell 16% over the quarter.
Really?
But mobile graphics increased by around 7%, according to this information from John Petty Research.
Okay. That's just really odd to me.
Well, it could be a lot of it with crypto mining collapsing. Well, okay. I say collapsing, but it's still semi-viable, but it's not as viable as it once was. Mm. And with Bitcoin basically in free fall the last couple of weeks.
That's such a good term. Free fall.
This was their statement. The effect of crypto mining on desktop discrete GPU sales is over, leaving both AMD and NVIDIA with an oversupply in the channel and impacting shipment levels. In addition, the tax increase on products from China by the US has had a small effect, which may slightly worsen Q4.
Well, I know that statements like these have had an effect on NVIDIA's stock. Some press came out about that recently.
Yes. NVIDIA's stock took a tumble believe it was last
A week or
week
two ago.
before last,
Yeah.
where it fell like 19% in a couple of days.
Yeah. Can't
All
say
the
I was
gains
sad to
they
see
had
that.
made over the last 2 or 3 years basically got wiped out in a couple of afternoons.
Well, that's what happens when you've got a rough Turing launch backed by, you know, announcements of what occurred to your bottom line when the GPU mining craze came to a halt and their Polaris pricing or their Pascal pricing came back to where it or closer to where it should be. So no love lost. No love lost.
So yeah, it's interesting. Actual shipments of GPUs went up as a whole, but the shipments of desktop GPUs went down. So apparently people like laptops that they can game on.
That's really odd to me. Who wants a gaming laptop? Meh. Meh, meh, meh.
I mean, I did back in college when I was young and needed something portable to take with me to class.
Yeah, I could see that. Or if you're a truck driver.
Indeed. Let's see. Okay, that brings me to the first topic I wanted to discuss this evening, because this is a potentially exciting technology that Samsung is finally bringing to their mainstream product line, and that
QLC?
is quad level cell NAND flash, or QLC flash.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for those who are not familiar, NAND flash that goes into your SSD, and basically all other devices that use this type of memory, comes in 4 basic flavors. You have SLC, or single level cell NAND, where each cell on the NAND flash can store exactly 1 bit of information. Then you have multi-level cell, or MLC, which generally can handle 2 bits per cell. Then you have what used to be the value proposition for most SSDs, which was triple level cell, or tri-level cell, TLC NAND flash, which was used in a lot of budget drives. QLC, or quad level cell flash, can store up to 4 bits of information per cell, which means much higher information density, but that comes at a cost.
There's a performance cost.
Mm-hmm. And so I've included links to 2 of the reviews on this new Samsung 860 QVO SSD. And so
Basically, go ahead.
The first one is from PC World, and the conclusion that they reach is that in general, it performs fairly fast. But one of the problems that QLC had, that TLC had before it, is that when you get into writing large amounts of data, your performance suffers immensely.
Yeah, so basically they're going from right around the typical 500, megabytes per second to around 70 when they're writing a 48 gigabyte file. Now, granted, that's kind of probably an edge case, but still, it is there and it does exist, and it's a repeatable test. So if you've got some specific workloads, basically you're running out of a capacity for the drive to fill its cache, and for the cache to be read from, and you're basically pulling directly from the flash memory. in the test. So that's when it jumps down to like 70 megabytes per second versus 500 something.
Right. The critical problem is when the DRAM cache basically runs out.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, this was a problem TLC drives had just with quad level cell QLC, it's magnified. Because since you're able to fit 4 bits of information in each and every cell, that means that there are in total something like 16 different possible configurations in each cell. And so that means that straight writes can be a problem.
Well, and I mean, honestly, if you look at it from a high level, it's intended to be a cheap drive, right? So you shouldn't expect it to completely excel and trounce in all types of workloads. You know, at what am I trying to say? Being the fact that it is an inexpensive drive, you should not expect it to have a professional level of performance at all workloads. I mean, most of the time, most workloads, it's a very fast drive.
Right. And, you know, this being based on the 860 EVO, which was the budget drive of choice for a very long time, still is for a lot of people. The fact this is based on that, it's largely designed to kind of replace the old TLC NAND flash drives of old that were the budget option. In particular, though, where this drive shines is in its high capacity configurations. Because of its QLC flash, it's able to fit more information on fewer NAND dies,
which hopefully will eventually result in better prices.
In particular, the 2 terabyte and 4 terabyte iterations of this drive are several $100s less than their competition.
That's pretty notable.
Obviously, at that point, when you're talking about 2 terabytes and 4 terabytes of solid state storage, your average user isn't going to want or need nearly that much for their boot drive, for their drive to make their system more responsive. Now, if you're using this as like a games library or in a system where you need high-speed scratch disk space, then this could be a solid option.
Yeah, I could see if you were wanting to get into that 2 or 4 terabyte area. It's still kind of pricey. 1 terabyte right now, they're saying they're listing an MSRP of about $150. I think we're seeing TLC drives around 120 to 130 at 1 terabyte, which right now, I don't think the price makes a whole lot of sense, but it's close. I want to see if they can get closer to that $120 price point, which they probably will throughout the course of 2019 at some point.
Right.
Yeah. Then it makes sense.
Yeah. At the higher capacities, for example, the 2 terabyte version of the drive is retailing for $299.99, which, if you've looked at other 2 terabyte drives, you know that is around the same price that they're asking for those size drives.
Mm-hmm.
But the $599 for the 4 terabyte version is significantly cheaper than the others of comparable size. A lot of your 4 terabytes are going from anywhere from 700 to 800.
Well, at that point, that does make sense. That's still really rich for my blood, though.
Yeah. But there are some people who can actually make use of 4 terabyte drives.
Hmm. Pretty cool tech.
And the advantage of the larger size drives is that you get a larger cache, which means you don't run into the slowdown problem with them as soon as you do other drives.
That's true. I think they're listing what 1 gigabyte of cache, of primary cache per 1 terabyte of capacity. So
More or less. Yeah, the 1 terabyte gets 1 gig of low power DDR4. The 2 terabyte gets 2 gigs. The 4 terabyte gets 4 gigs.
yeah. So you're looking at essentially much higher file transfers before you run out of cache. So
Yep, that is the plan.
gotcha. Interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing the prices drop.
Like I said, Samsung is not the first one to implement an SSD using QLC flash. Intel technically did first with their 660p, but by putting it in a SATA drive, Samsung is bringing that technology to the mainstream.
Mm-hmm. Which is good because SATA is still a very viable connection. I mean, it's in everything. So, and honestly, 500 megabytes per second is more than fast enough for day-to-day use. So, pretty cool, man.
Alrighty, let's see what else we got here. Yes. So the other big topic I wanted to focus on, there's been a lot of talk about AMD's near future because they're going to be giving a talk at CES to kind of introduce the show, where the thinking is that they're, as a keynote speaker, they're probably going to introduce or show off, either third gen Ryzen, the Ryzen 3000 series, or something else. And with the future of AMD, particularly with all their bet on their 7 nanometer process, I noticed there was a number of articles discussing what exactly that looks like, and there's also been some leaked benchmarks that could give us a little more insight. So we'll actually start with those. This is from WCCF Tech, but it is a leak from another site. Basically, it is a comparison between AMD's EPYC Rome 64-core CPU alongside Intel's Cascade Lake AP 48-core Xeons. And these were apparently benchmarked on systems in the 2S configuration. For those of you not familiar with corporate speak, the 2S configuration means in a dual CPU socket motherboard.
2-socket, basically.
Mm-hmm. And so what we're seeing in the benchmarks looks like they captured a Cinebench R15 score on this 128 core, 256 thread machine, which you can guess which machine that is. Hint, the Threadripper one. Got a score of 12,861 in Cinebench R15. Now, for comparison, a Intel Xeon X5650, which is a 6-core, 12-thread CPU from a number of years ago, about 8 years ago, gets about a tenth that score.
That's just insane. I mean, I've been doing a lot of Cinebench testing lately as I've been tweaking. And with Ryzen 7, I can appreciate that kind of performance. That's insane. 12,000. I mean, a Ryzen 7, a good Ryzen 7 scores around 1900. 18 to 1900 is a good Ryzen 7 score. That's just crazy.
So yeah, keep your eye out for these 64 core behemoths. One thing that should be noted, with all 128 cores and 256 threads enabled, the CPUs in the AMD EPYC system were limited to a base clock of 1.80 gigahertz. So,
yeah, well, you're looking at, I mean, you're packing so many cores in. I mean, they've got to do some sort of power management at some point, and clock speed's gonna suffer because of that.
Indeed.
That's just crazy, though. Look at that score. 12,480. That's insanity.
And so, speaking of 7-nanometer EPYC CPUs, Extreme Tech talks about how AMD may have doubled per core L3 cache on their 7-nanometer EPYC CPUs. This would be a huge deal if they've done so, because it would remove one of the deficiencies that the original EPYC processors had. And that was that they would, under intense workloads, run out of cache. And of course, then you're into the speed of Infinity Fabric.
Yeah. Because you're moving from level 3, your level 4 cache is going to be your system RAM. So, yeah. I could see that. I could see that. Well, I mean, look, honestly, they're packing so many cores in. I could definitely see that being having a few workloads there where that's a limitation. And when you think about it, how much cache does it actually have? It has 8 L3 caches of 8 megs each. So that's 64, right?
More or less, yes.
Total, but it's probably grouped in per node or CCX or something like that. So, okay. So it really shouldn't be viewed holistically as 64 megs. Okay, that makes sense.
Right. Each core gets its own 8 megabyte cache.
So they're upping it to 16. Interesting. I wonder if desktop and Threadripper will have the same enhancement.
That's a good question.
Because you'd be going to 32 on the desktop variants.
We shall have to see.
I don't know if that would be a huge increase in performance, though. Honestly. I don't know.
Yeah, at this point, a lot of our programs aren't designed to take advantage of that many threads. I mean, just go look at the way Adobe chokes on systems with multiple threads, but basically a Premiere doesn't care if you have past, I think, about 4.
Well, they're leveraging more GPU horsepower, especially the Intel IGP. That's why an i5 can trounce a Ryzen 7 in Premiere Pro, or at least be at parity. This is interesting, though.
All right, and one last bit about AMD's 7 nanometer future, and that is that apparently, in an interview, AMD CTO let slip that apparently Zen 3, now remember, the current Zen 2 is going to be used in the Ryzen 3000 series and the Threadripper 3000 series. So keep that in mind. Zen 3 is the next architecture down the line. Apparently, they're claiming that Zen 3 will primarily leverage efficiency with some modest performance opportunities.
So that's a bit of a gamble to take that kind of an approach, because if all of the current press is to be believed, they're significantly optimizing Zen 2 over Zen Plus. You know, they're beefing up the front end. They're doubling the floating point unit. Then, of course, the die shrink to 7 nanometer. So there's some potential expectation to increase core count. And then just the die shrink in itself, they're going to increase clock speeds too. So, I mean, conservatively, you're looking at a 15% increase in performance, just with all of the optimizations plus clock speed. So if they can actually hit at, say, 15% increase in performance, the move to Zen 3, they're saying here, they're just looking at improving efficiency. I mean, you'll still get some performance increase, probably 3 to 5%. But that to me says they're really banking on the performance increase to Zen 2 over Zen Plus. That's why I'm saying it's a gamble.
Well, one of the key things is that Zen 3 will be on a new 7 nanometer plus extreme ultraviolet process node.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't surprise me if they're moving to a whole new process using a technology that they've not used before, then going for a modest performance uplift and power efficiency strikes me as probably prudent.
Well, I get the feeling that they're going to be on 7 nanometer for a while.
Would not surprise me. We've seen how long Intel has been stuck at 14 nanometer because their 10 nanometer process didn't work out the way they thought it would.
Yeah.
And as you get closer to the limit for silicon dies, we may not see a move to smaller process nodes from this point until such time as all other means of gaining performance have been exhausted.
Right. Well, they still have some life left in silicone. I mean, what are they estimating? That the limits to silicone will be around 1 nanometer? 3 nanometer, something like that?
It depends on your FinFET design. Because, yeah, in the 1 to 3 nanometer range, you start running into problems where electrons go where they aren't supposed to. Or they start jumping traces because they're so close to each other.
That's like my 9-year-old. She doesn't go where she's supposed to. She never goes where she's supposed to. Silly munchkin face. I don't know, man. It's going to be... I just get this feeling that the 7 nanometer move is going to be really, really big for them.
I hope it's certainly so, because Mark Papermaster and several other the guys there at AMD seem to think so.
That's just the general feeling that I get. And they've got a great opportunity here since Intel's still stuck at 14. So,
yeah, we'll have to see how it goes.
Really looking forward to the first half of 2019.
Yep. All right. Well, those are all the major news topics I want to discuss this evening. And while Black Friday and Cyber Monday may have passed, there are still a few tech deals out there that, if you're willing to look for them, exist. And I've got a couple here. These are some really budget-end items, but at their current price point, they are still very viable. The first, these are both from Newegg, but the first is a PowerColor Red Dragon Radeon RX 560. Now, it should be noted that this is the 14 compute unit version, meaning that it only has 896 stream processors versus the 1024 in the full-fat 560 and 560X. So this is really just an overclocked RX 460 with 560 branding. That said, they're asking on Newegg currently $105, $104.99, but there's a $20 mail-in rebate. So you can get yourself a 4 gigabyte RX 560 for $85.
That's pretty good.
And for a GPU that can easily handle esports at 1080p Ultra, or that could handle most modern AAA games at probably 1080p low, or maybe
720p high.
Yeah, 720p high. If you want to get into gaming, or if you have an older desktop that you want to upgrade with something with a little more oomph, this would not be a bad option for doing so. Now, admittedly, we've talked about in the past our frustration with AMD's naming scheme for the 560, where you have one 560 that's basically an 896 stream processor version with 14 compute units. And then you have the full fat version, which has all 16 compute units and has, I think it's 1024 stream processors. And there is enough of a performance delta between the two that it almost feels like they should have been two separate SKUs.
Yeah. This is the 896 variant, by the way.
Yes, this is the 896 variant. It does come factory overclocked to 1176 megahertz. And it does come with 4 gigabytes of VRAM.
Yep.
So you do get those bonuses, because most RX 560s that have the 896 stream processors typically run 2.
But honestly, at that price point, there's no way you're ever going to get close to filling that 4 gig frame buffer.
Correct. But
you don't have the GPU to back it up.
Correct. This is a GPU that serves two basic purposes. It's an entry-level gaming device that lets you get into basic games, your esports titles at decent refresh rates, while also giving you entry-level gaming at between 720p and 1080p.
Yeah. Yep.
I bet this GPU at 900p would give you a more than satisfactory gaming experience.
Yeah, so I mean, if you have like an older generation i3 or a locked i5 that's an on-K variant, like Sandy Bridge, Ivy Bridge, maybe Haswell, say you got like a Dell or something like that, and you just want to upgrade the GPU, you could just slap this thing in and it'll run off the PCI Express power. and you got a nice little upgrade. You know, I mean, it's got some gaming chops on it. It's not not 1050 or 1060 level, but $85, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's not bad. Want to play a little World of Warships or some Overwatch? No
Right.
problem. No problem.
It should handle that easily.
Mm-hmm. And you had another deal in here, didn't you, Ned?
Yes, I did. But there was something I was wanting to check real quick.
Oh.
This one technically has solder points for a 6-pin, but I'm looking at the PCB and there isn't a 6-pin soldered to it, so you're correct. There are versions of the RX 560 that do have a 6-pin for supplemental power. This one does not.
That'd be an interesting mod. Solder on a 6-pin to it?
Give it supplemental power, see if you could overclock it higher.
Yeah.
Adventures in budget modification.
Yeah. Adventures in $85 land?
Speaking of adventures in budget land, my other deal that I found this week is for an ASRock AB350M Pro 4 Micro ATX motherboard. This is an AM4 socket. It is the B350 chipset. So this will be perfect for your mid-range GP or mid-range CPUs and mid-range GPUs. Something along the lines of a Ryzen 5, whether first gen or second gen, or one of the 2000G APUs like the 2200G or the 2400G. This would be perfect for that. This motherboard is currently selling for $75, but it has a $20 rebate, which means you effectively get this motherboard for $55.
Yeah, the only thing I would highly stress is do not buy this board and get a Ryzen 5 or Ryzen 7. What I mean Ryzen, like a higher end Ryzen 5, like an X variant, like a 6-core X variant. Do not get a 2600X and expect it to perform really well on this board, especially with multi-threaded workloads. You buy a $55 board, you get a lower end Ryzen 5 or Ryzen 3, or like Ned said, one of the G variants, and you're perfectly fine. That's a good board for that. But don't get a Ryzen 7 or an X, like a higher end X part, like a 1600X or 2600X, and really expect this board to be a good pairing with that part. Please don't do that. Anything else, perfectly fine. It'll run really, really well.
Yeah, and the fact, also the other reason why I like this particular board, you actually have 4 full DIMM slots. At this price point, that is not a guarantee.
Yes, yes. And you know, the IO is not bad. You get USB-C, you get, like, I want to say 4 USB 3, you get 2 USB 2. You get pretty decent video options here. You've got what? I can't tell. Is that HDMI or DisplayPort?
Let's see. So
That looks like HDMI.
yeah, looks
So
like
HDMI, DVI, and VGA.
Yep.
It's not bad. $55 board, and you could put a G part on here and run dual monitors. That's actually pretty good because a lot of the motherboards that allow you to run an APU, you do not have the ability to run dual monitors. A lot of the boards only have a single video out, like an HDMI. So that's not bad, actually.
And this particular board has the ability to mount NVMe M.2 SSDs. The main slot on the front, according to the specification page, the Ultra M.2 socket, which is marked as M.2 or M2_1, supports PCIe modules up to Gen 3 x 4 speed.
Nice.
And it also has a second M.2 socket, but that one, if I remember correctly, yeah, I think it's may actually be on the back of the board.
Yeah, I'm looking. You gotta... I don't see it. I don't see it. I don't know. I think it's only got one M.2.
Well, the reason I say that is because it says in the specifications one Ultra M.2 socket that supports M-key PCIe Express modules.
Mm-hmm.
And then one M.2 socket that supports M-key types SATA 3 modules.
Look in the lower right-hand corner.
Yep, there it
above,
is.
Yeah. Unless that's an angled USB 3 slot, but I doubt you see that on a board of this price point.
Probably not.
That might be. Yeah, that is. You're right. Because if you look just above the USB 2 header, you've got the screw holes there for the different M.2 form factors. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
So, a solid budget board. Like we said, if you find a good deal on, say, a Ryzen 5 1400, a Ryzen 5 1600, or if you're willing to take the gamble and try to put a 2000 series CPU on here, just be aware it may or may not have the BIOS updated. I know the listing claims Ryzen 2000 ready, but you have no way of knowing whether the BIOS has been updated beforehand. So plan accordingly.
Unless it says on the box Ryzen 2000 ready.
Right.
Then you're okay.
And technically, this motherboard does have a few small RGB LEDs.
Really? Oh, yeah. Upper right corner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you probably have one 12-volt and then one 5-volt for addressable, which is perfectly fine because you can get splitters and RGB controllers and stuff like that. So, you know what? Actually, this is not a bad option for like a 4-core X variant or like the APU like you were talking about. I wouldn't go much higher than that, but yeah, you could get like a nice 4-core 8-thread, get like a 570, 580. This would be perfectly fine for something like that, as long as you're not planning to do much overclocking. Yeah, it's not bad. I would not stick more than a 2600 on here, though.
Right, just because once you start going to the higher end i5s, the 6-core i5s or i5s, Ryzen 5s, the 6-core Ryzen 5s, you start running into the limits of that VRM solution.
Yeah, and while the heat sinks look okay, you're just dealing with a 3-phase VRM here, and I don't even know what the MOSFETs are like. You know, if they're 30 or 40 amp, they're probably just 20 amp. But they're gonna have, this is kind of a fake. This is not a. So how many chokes do they have there? One, two, three, four, five, six, seven. Yeah. No. No. This is going to be a 3-phase, either 3+1 or 3+2. You could probably get away with a fan directly over the VRM heatsinks if you had to, which at least they are kind of finned out. So, you know, some decent airflow over those, or one of the stock downdraft coolers would be perfectly adequate here. Yeah, just don't expect miracles for a $55 board.
Yeah. If you picked up some of those deals we talked about last week, in particular, the $100 16 gigs of DDR4 pair with this, a 2400G, we'll say, you'd have the core to an excellent entry-level system that could do everything from HTPC to entry-level gaming. And by entry-level, I truly mean entry-level, as in, don't get me wrong, the Ryzen 5 2400G's Vega 11 graphics are some of the best integrated graphics you can buy, but they are exactly that, integrated graphics.
Right. Well, I mean, you're looking at a $400 or $500 budget build, so which has enough CPU to back up probably at least a GTX 1070. I wouldn't go much higher than that.
Right.
But yeah, it's not a bad system. It's a nice system.
Yeah, I tried to kind of round it all out, I tried to find a deal on, say, like a Ryzen 5 1400 or the 2400G. Apparently, most of those deals have already expired. And I also tried to find a deal on RAM. The best deal I found was actually originally listed over on Tom's Hardware. And they found a 16 gig set of Corsair Vengeance LPX for $130. And that is DDR4 3200.
Really? That's a heck of a deal, actually.
It's not quite as good as some of those Black Friday deals where you were getting similar amounts of RAM for about $100, but given that we are now in the post-Black Friday and post-Cyber Monday period, you're probably not going to find those deals again for a while.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, yes, there was one other deal I meant to mention and I did not include a link for, so I apologize. And that the reason I did not include a link for it is I don't know if it's still going to be live by the time this video goes live. But I will mention it nevertheless. On Newegg, you can get the Corsair H110i 240mm liquid CPU cooler for $90.
That's not a bad deal. I want to say that usually retails around 110, 115 probably.
But the reason I didn't include the link for it is because, unfortunately, that sale only goes through Friday. Now, when we're recording this on Wednesday, it doesn't say what time on Friday that deal goes through. So that's why I didn't include it, because I don't know if it's still going to be there by the time our audience sees this.
Right.
And so, with that, we have reached the end of this week's podcast. Jason, have anything else you'd like to add or anything you'd like to plug?
Look for my first video to come out on YouTube this week. I'm wrapping up editing as we speak. It's taken me forever. I've been in editing video school, kindergarten, like HELL forever. I'm just I'm putting it out there. I'm brand new to this kind of stuff. So I recently learned what lighting meant and what mics are all about. I'm still learning, but I've got several videos to follow. So I'm currently building lots of budget systems and flipping them. So there's going to be some of that kind of content, as well as some videos that are like 3 and 4 months old. So yeah, look for that stuff to come out on my channel soon. Beyond that, I don't really have anything to plug. I'm kind of in brain dead mode right now. So
yeah, unfortunately, again, due to the weird time constraints, it is a little late while we're recording this.
Yeah.
But anyway, if you've enjoyed anything you've seen here, then please like the video, share it to your friends and family, and leave us a comment down below. You'll find links to all the articles we discussed in the description just below this video. I've been Dynamo Ned. This has been episode 23 of the TechForge podcast. And remember, when life has you down, forge on.
I'm rocking right now, Ned. See? I'm rocking.
Then we best cut off before we have to do any further rocking.
Back and forth rock? Yeah. It's late night insanity on Ned's TechForge channel.
Thank you once again for putting up with us, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
Have a good one.